getting started. So very first thing we need to talk about for beginners. What is EWar? What different types of EWar are there? And what ships can use it? So types and uses of EWar. Each race has its own racial EWar inherent in its ships, or at least the EWar variants of those ships. So Galente has damps. Damps are methods for affecting the lock time or lock distance, lock range of an enemy ship. So you can range damp someone and reduce the locking range of their ship, or you can scan res damp someone and increase the amount of time it takes them to lock a target. You have Minmatar, who have target painters. Target painters are very basic. They make the target bigger. Just like target painters in real life, it increases the accuracy of things shot against them. Both turrets and drones and missiles. I said both. All three of those. Basically any damage you can imagine that would be done to a ship can be improved by painting it. Amar have tracking disruptors and guidance disruptors. These types of EWar affect how well guns or missiles can track, reducing the damage when used properly of an enemy ship. So tracking disruptors can either reduce the tracking speed of turrets or the optimal range of those turrets. So you can either reduce their ability to track quickly or reduce their ability to fire long range. And then guidance disruptors can affect, I want to say, either missile range or explosion velocity, explosion radius. Let's double check that so we're sure. Here's the guidance disruptor. Attributes is telling us that it has explosion velocity, explosion radius, and flight time. And you can script this to affect the explosion velocity and explosion radius and not flight time. So it'll affect these more. And then same thing, you can script it to affect flight time, but not explosion radius and velocity, and it'll affect flight time more than it would otherwise. And finally, we have Kaldari, who have jams. Jams have a chance, it's a dice roll, have a chance to stop a target ship from being able to lock anything but the thing that is jamming it. So if I'm in a Griffin and I jam a ship successfully, that ship can only target my Griffin and nothing else. There are 5 different types of targeted jammers, one for each race. So each race of ship has a sensor type, and there is a jam flavor to go with each of those. It's really easy to remember which goes with which, because Galente ships, for example, have green backgrounds, and the type of jammer to use against Galente is green. And they all match up like that. Yellow for Amar, red for Minmatar, and blue for Kaldari. The types of ships that are specially designed to use EWar come in many different shapes and sizes. The T1 frigate line has the Mollis, the Vigil, the Crucifier, and the Griffin. Those are the most common ones that folks who are brand new at this will be flying in fleets, and we're going to talk about how to do that. We're actually going to undock, hopefully, with some of those ships and give it a shot. You have faction frigates. The only faction frigates that have bonuses here are the Griffin Navy issue and the Crucifier Navy issue. The Crucifier, Imperial Navy Crucifier, I think is what it's called. They get extra bonuses. T1 cruisers, you have the Blackbird for Kaldari, which with jamming bonuses. You have the Celestis for Galente with damp bonuses. You have the Bellicose for Minmatar with paint bonuses, and you have the Arbitrator for Amar with tracking disruption and guidance disruption bonuses. Then we have T2 frigates, electronic attack frigates, which also have bonuses, and they're what you would graduate to if you like the EWar stuff. I would recommend graduating from T1 frigates to T1 cruisers to T2 frigates. Good question, so I'll actually get that in a second. So T2 frigates will be electronic attack frigates, and that's the Hyena, Carries, Kitsune, and Sentinel. Sentinel is a nasty ship, by the way. They're actually all really, really good. All four of those T2 electronic attack frigates. Okay. After T2 frigates, we have T2 cruisers. There's actually 8 of them. Cases and Arazu for Galente have sensor damp bonuses. The Rapier and Hugin for Mimitar have target paint bonuses. The Curse and Pilgrim have tracking disruption bonuses, and the Rook and Falcon have jamming bonuses. T3 cruisers, again, stays the same across the line. You've got the Proteus, Loki, Legion, and Tengu, all with their races expected bonuses to EWar if you fit the proper subsystem. And then we have very special, the Kaldari battleships have EWar, and actually just very specifically the Widow and the Scorpion have jam bonuses, and the Golem has a target painting bonus. That's the one sort of off-race bonus, but the Golem has a target painting bonus. And we're going to start getting familiar with the actual modules on our ship. So you should be able to hover over the EWar module on your specific ship and see the optimal and fall-off range. I want you to warp to my Jackdaw at whatever range works best. That's somewhere between optimal and fall-off. You don't want to be too close. You don't want to be too far either. If you get it wrong, that's okay. That's what we're here to do, is to learn about it. The other thing that I didn't mention is to take notice of your lock range. So can everyone lock me from where they're at right now? If you can't, then that's another thing you need to take into account. There are, again, skills to affect your lock range, but it looks like everyone is good. Cool. So in a fleet situation, what's usually happening is there are 2 fleets duking it out, and the FCs are completely focused on dealing damage to the enemy and stopping them from dealing damage to them. The Logis focused on keeping everyone alive. The damage dealing ships are focused on following broadcasts and watching for the enemy locking them. There's so much going on that in many cases, T1 EWar frigates, like the ones you guys are in, can fly right under the radar and do lots of really effective things without anyone taking notice. So the way to keep yourself safe while flying EWar and also being effective is to A, know what your EWar does and which ships you should be using it on. We'll get to that in a moment. And 2, to always be aligned. So this is where the tricky part comes in. You can just orbit whatever, kind of the fight in general. Like the Vigil, for example, might just anchor with the DPS, but you guys should never be broadcasting for reps in T1 frigates, especially in sort of larger coalition or sub-coalition fleets. Your tank, your ability to survive, is by warping out. So if you guys don't have pings on this grid, you can use the gate, you can use the jump bridge, you can use the planet nearby. Those are all things that you can warp out to. So I want to see everyone start moving. And you should pick a thing to align to that will not take you closer to the fight, because you want to be as far away from the fight as you can while still being effective. But you also want to, and by the way, consider my Jackdaw to be the fight, right? So you don't want to be moving towards my Jackdaw if you can help it. And you also want to pick a thing to align to, so that when you warp out, you can quickly warp back to the engagement and continue being annoying. Okay, so what things do you use your EWar on in a fight? The Griffins should jam enemy Logi. Logistic ships are Scythes, Scimitars, Ospreys, Basilisks, Executors, Oniroses, augurs, guardians, and sometimes T3s. There are other niche fleets where there are maybe frigate logi, maybe there's T3 logi, maybe there's Gnosis logi, in which case you just kind of have to learn those situations and get better at identifying them and figuring out what the logi is. So Griffins should jam logi. You'll notice that's a theme, by the way, as we go here to next to the Mollis, right? If you have damps on your ship, you should be damping the logi. Now, which script to run for your damps depends largely on the actual layout of the engagement. It can be really difficult to tell when you're new, so if you just run unscripted when you're new and you're not sure what to do, that's fine. But when you get better at it, and when you're starting to understand the situation better, when enemy logi is far away from their DPS, you want to range damp them. If you range damp them and they're far enough away from their friendly DPS, you can actually be effectively jamming them. You can reduce their lock range so much that they cannot lock a target to rep it. So if enemy logi is far away from the rest of the ships in their fleet, you want to range damp them. If they're close or right on top of the rest of the ships in their fleet, if logi and the main fleet are right together, again, we're looking at the enemy fleet. If they're right together, you want to use scan res damps so that they are slower to lock the targets. The idea being you want to reduce the logi's effectiveness such that maybe your fleet can kill their target before the logi can even lock them. So that's the Mollis, that is damps. So then the Crucifier. The Crucifier is the first one we're going to talk about that should be targeting enemy DPS, not logi. So again, the Griffin and the Mollis are focused on enemy logi. The Crucifier should be focused on enemy DPS. If you have 2, then you want to lock up 2 targets. If you have 3, you want to lock up 3 targets. Basically, however many disruptors you have, that's the number of targets you want to lock. This is where knowing what the enemy is going to be in ahead of time comes in handy, because you want to know if you should be fitting guidance disruptors or tracking disruptors. If the enemy fleet is using turrets, you want to be using tracking disruptors. If they're using missiles, you want to be using guidance disruptors. The basic concept is if the enemy fleet is far away from the friendly fleet, you want to optimal range or flight time disrupt their weapons. If they are close or otherwise having trouble tracking the friendly fleet because they're close, you want to use tracking speed or missile guidance. What are the 2 scripts called for guidance computers? Precision, that's the word, yes. So if the enemy's missiles are already close and range isn't going to do anything, then you want to load precision scripts. Precision disruption scripts is what they'd probably be called. So it can be a little tricky with the Crucifier, but you are effectively reducing the damage of the enemy fleet by making it either harder for them to track or them unable to reach out far enough to touch the friendly fleet. Okay, and then the Vigil. I saved the Vigil for last because the Vigil is the easiest one. You have a target painter. Your target painter just makes ships big and easier to hit. The only use for your target painter is target painting the primary that the fleet is shooting. It's very simple to fly Vigil. Just paint whatever the fleet is shooting. So what we're about to do is a live fire exercise. This is we've moved through beginner, intermediate. This is the advanced part. I will basically ungroup my guns and I'll just be using 1 missile, so no one should need to die here. And basically you guys are going to set up the same way you just were at the proper range from my ship to keep yourself as alive as possible. Go ahead and jump into Effie. We want to be aligned. You want to be in range to use your EWar, but not so close that you're like right on top of me. As far away as possible while still being effective. And let me warp us to a planet. Stand by. Take this warp.
Warp drive active.
And I'm going to start moving around, shooting at you guys. When you get shot, your job in an EWar frigate is to warp away. Do not broadcast for reps. You're not going to receive any help from Logi. In fact, you make Logi's job extremely difficult if you broadcast a T1 Frig. So go ahead and get it ranged, get the proper range from the Jackdaw, whatever that means for your particular EWar ship. Go ahead and lock me up and start using the, start jamming me, painting me, damping me, all that stuff. Okay, so what's happening, by the way, just so you guys know, is actually as the damps go on and off, I can see my lock range changing. You guys, if you watch the recording of this, you'll be able to see my lock range adjusting as the damps go on and off. My sig radius is bigger. If I had turrets, I wouldn't be able to use them. Go ahead and jam me, Elisa. Go ahead and use your jams. Good moving here. There we go. All right. So I can't even lock the Griffin at 39 kilometers. This is how effective EWar is. Right, but as I start moving, right, your guys' job is a little more tricky. Remember, if you're taking damage in EWar ship, your job is to warp away. You're not going to survive here. Go. Obviously, there's only one enemy ship that you guys are having to deal with, but this should be a microcosm of what it would be like in an actual fleet fight. Right, at times the enemy DPS or the FC is going to get annoyed with you and tell his fleet to shoot you. Your job is to warp away and warp back. Now notice we're on grid with some stuff. One thing you'll want to do is find the closest thing to warp to that is safe. You'll also want to make bookmarks as you're flying around the grid and be creating bookmarks for yourself constantly. The reason for this is it will make your job of warping off and then warping back much easier. Your downtime is very short if you have a bookmark that's 1,000 kilometers away that you can just warp to and then warp back. The Vigil is definitely the most difficult here. You can just stay so far away with that thing. You guys get any idea? Any questions? Yes, that is why your warp was not working. That's correct. Questions. Is this useful for you guys? Is this helpful at all? It's actually not the name of the ship, it's the name of his character. Which I agree is very funny. The damps are actually getting me down to like 30 kilometers, which is crazy. I could switch to sharpshooter mode and increase that, but then I'm much slower and it's harder for me to catch up to you guys and actually deal with damage. Now I'm just going to split my guns and make it really hard for you guys. Oh, those damps are nuts. Now the Crucifier is out of range. Although you're getting close, right? So you have to warp too. Okay, I'll go ahead and kill the guns and the prop bot. So there's your live fire exercise. Did you guys find that useful? Is that helpful at all? Okay, cool. Cool, yeah. You guys can stop aggressing. Good here. That was it. So there's the advanced version is getting more grid awareness, dropping bookmarks, paying attention to the incoming damage, and paying attention to where enemies. This becomes, as I'm sure you can imagine, much more tricky when you throw enemy tackle into the mix, because the tackle is probably going to be going for you. So you gotta watch where the enemy tackle is. You gotta see as they're getting close to you. You need to be warping off and then warping back to something else at range. Maybe you warp to the FC at range. Maybe you warp to a wreck at range. All this stuff becomes immensely more complicated the more factors you add into it. And in a large fleet fight, there are many, many factors. But hopefully, this gives you guys the tools to at least get started. Hopefully that makes sense. Anything else before we call it?